Have you ever wondered how a girl who could not even read her own name ended up leading an army and changing the future of a country? Welcome back, my friend. Come sit with me for a while. Let your shoulders relax. Let your mind slow down. Tonight, we are traveling back in time, to a quiet field in France, where a young girl stood among the sheep, listening to something no one else could hear. That girl was about to become one of the most remarkable figures in all of history. Her name was Joan of Arc, and by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why the world still remembers her name today. It was around the year 1412, in a small village called Domremy, in the northeast of France. A baby girl was born into a simple farming family. Her parents named her Jean. In English, we say Joan. Her father, Jacques, worked the land. Her mother, Isabelle, cared for the home and taught Joan about faith. The family was not wealthy. They were not important people in the eyes of the world. They were ordinary. Just another peasant family, living quietly among the fields and the animals. The word peasant simply means a person who works on the land, usually a farmer with very little money or power. Joan never went to school. She never learned to read or write. Instead, she learned the things a farm girl was expected to know. She learned to sew. She learned to spin wool into thread. She took care of the sheep and the cows, and she worked beside her father when the seasons demanded it. But more than anything, Joan learned devotion. Devotion means a deep and loyal love, especially toward God or a strong belief. Her mother taught her to pray, and Joan prayed often, with a quiet seriousness that surprised the adults around her. She was, in every visible way, an unremarkable village girl. But the world beyond Domremy was far from peaceful. France, at that time, was caught in the middle of a long and painful war. This conflict, fought between France and England, had already lasted almost 100 years. Historians would later name it, quite simply, the 100 Years' War. The English army had captured large sections of northern France, and they were supported by a powerful group of French nobles called the Burgundians, who had turned against their own countrymen and fought alongside the English instead. Villages burned. Farms were destroyed. Families lost everything they had. Even in the small, quiet corner of Domremy, Joan saw soldiers pass through her village. Sometimes the villagers had to run and hide for their own safety. The King of France had died, and his son, also named Charles, had not yet been crowned. Because the coronation, the official ceremony that made someone a true king, could only happen in a cathedral in the city of Reims, and Reims was under English control, Charles remained uncrowned. Without that ceremony, many people did not fully accept him as their king. He was simply called the Dauphin, a title given to the future king before he wears the crown. France, in other words, had no true king. Only a young man, waiting. And then, when Joan was around 13 years old, something happened that changed everything. She began to hear voices. She said these voices came from heaven itself, belonging to saints she named as Michael, Catherine, and Margaret. The voices told her that she had been chosen for something far greater than farm work. Her mission, they said, was to save France. She was to help drive the English out of the country, and she was to help the Dauphin finally receive his crown. Try to imagine that for a moment. A 13-year-old girl. She cannot read. She has never traveled beyond her village. She has never held a sword or seen a battlefield. And she believes, with complete certainty, that God is asking her to rescue an entire nation. For years, she told almost no one. She kept working in the fields, caring for the animals, praying quietly in the village church. But inside her, something was shifting. She was waiting. She was preparing herself for the moment she would finally have to act. By 1429, Joan was around 17 years old, and the voices had grown too strong to ignore any longer. She traveled to the nearest town and asked to meet with the local military commander, a man named Robert de Baudricourt. She told him plainly that she needed to reach the Dauphin, because God had sent her to help France win the war. He looked at this small farm girl standing before him, and he laughed at her. He sent her away without a second thought. But Joan did not give up. She returned again. And again. Each time, she remained calm. She was steady and serious, never raising her voice, never breaking down in tears. She simply repeated the same request, quietly and clearly, "I must see the Dauphin. God has sent me." Slowly, something began to shift in the people around her. Soldiers who once dismissed her started to believe. Villagers began speaking of her with a strange kind of respect. And finally, Robert agreed to let her travel to the royal court. Before she left, Joan cut her hair short and dressed in men's clothing, trousers, boots, and a plain tunic. At that time, this was an unusual and even shocking choice for a young woman, one that people would remember and later use against her. She then made an 11-day journey across dangerous, war-torn territory, land controlled by English and Burgundian soldiers who could have captured or killed her at any moment. She traveled through the night. She crossed rivers. She slept in forests. And she never once turned back. When Joan finally reached the royal court, the Dauphin decided to test her. He dressed as an ordinary man and hid himself among his advisors, wanting to see if this peasant girl could actually recognize him. Joan walked into the crowded room, looked around calmly, and went directly to him. "I am Joan," she said. "God has sent me to help you. You will be crowned King of France." Charles was stunned. Still uncertain, he ordered his priests and scholars to question her for weeks, testing her faith and her honesty. In the end, they found nothing false in her. "She speaks with honesty," they told him. So, in the spring of 1429, Joan of Arc was given armor, a horse, and a banner of her own. She was sent to the city of Orléans, where one of the most important battles of the war was taking place. The English army had surrounded the city in what is called a siege, a military strategy where an army blocks all roads in and out, slowly starving the people inside until they are forced to surrender. Orléans was starving. And many believed that if it fell, all of France would fall with it. Joan arrived carrying a white banner painted with a holy image, riding a white horse into a city that had almost given up hope. And something changed in the soldiers who saw her. They had been losing for years. They had been afraid for years. But here was this ordinary farm girl, riding toward the enemy with complete, unshaken belief. She fought not only with strategy, but with faith. She stood at the front lines. She climbed the siege walls herself. At one point, an arrow struck her in the shoulder. She fell, pulled the arrow out with her own hands, and stood back up to keep fighting. Within just 9 days, the siege of Orléans was broken. The English retreated. The city was free. News of what happened at Orléans spread across France like wildfire. A farm girl had done what experienced generals could not. People began calling her the Maid of Orléans, maid being an old-fashioned word for a young woman. It was a name spoken with both wonder and deep respect. In the months that followed, Joan led the French army to victory after victory along the Loire River, town after town falling back into French hands, until finally, in July of 1429, Joan stood beside Charles inside the great cathedral at Reims as he was crowned King Charles VII of France. Joan stood there in her armor, holding her banner, tears on her face. The voices had asked her to do this. And she had done it. But life, as you may already know, rarely moves in a straight, gentle line. After the coronation, the war did not end, and the fighting only grew harder. As Joan's fame grew, so did the discomfort of those around the king. She was young. She had no noble blood. And yet she held more influence than many of his own advisors. In May of 1430, during a battle near the city of Compiègne, Burgundian soldiers pulled Joan from her horse and captured her. They held her prisoner, then sold her to the English for a large sum of money. And the king she had crowned with her own hands did nothing to save her. Joan was locked away in a cold stone tower for months, chained and closely guarded, before finally being put on trial, a legal process meant to determine guilt. But this was never meant to be a fair trial. The English wanted her dead, and they accused her of many things, including the claim that her voices were not truly from God. Though she was only 19 years old, could not read, and had no lawyer to defend her, Joan answered every question with striking calm and intelligence. When asked whether she believed she was in God's grace, she replied, "If I am not, may God place me there. And if I am, may God keep me there." It was a perfect answer, one that gave her accusers nothing to use against her. But the outcome had already been decided long before the trial began. On the 30th of May, in the year 1431, Joan of Arc was taken to the market square in the city of Rouen, tied to a wooden post, and burned at the stake. She was 19 years old. A girl from a small village. A girl who never learned to read. A girl who heard a voice, and followed it all the way to this painful end. It is said that one soldier watching that day looked up at the sky and whispered that they had just burned a saint. And perhaps, in some quiet way, he was right. Because the story did not end there. 25 years later, the church reopened her case, reviewed the evidence, and formally declared Joan innocent of every charge against her. And centuries after that, in 1920, she was officially recognized as a saint. The farm girl from Domremy. The girl who could not read. The girl who heard a voice that no one else could hear, became one of the most honored figures in the entire history of France. And now, before we close tonight's story, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Joan heard a voice that told her she had a purpose, even when the world around her laughed, doubted, and dismissed her. You have a voice too. Not one that comes from the sky, but one that lives quietly inside you, the voice that brought you here tonight, the one that says, "I want to learn. I want to understand. I want to grow." Some days, that voice may feel small. The world outside may feel louder than it is. You may wonder if your effort is truly making a difference. But you are here. You are listening. You are learning. And every word you understand tonight is proof that your voice deserves to be trusted. Keep listening to it. Keep following it, the way Joan did. Keep listening, keep learning, keep going. This is PastEcho.